Hello my dear dreamers, and welcome back to Emerald Dreams. I'm so glad you've joined me tonight as we settle into this quiet hour together, the world outside fading to a gentle hush while we prepare to journey into the ancient heart of Ireland. Tonight's tale is one that has echoed through the centuries, passed down from generation to generation around countless hearth fires, whispered in the shadowed glens of the Irish countryside, and sung in the great halls of kings. It is the story of Fionn McCool, perhaps the greatest hero of Irish mythology, and his legendary band of warriors known as the Fianna. These are not merely stories of battles and glory, though such things abound within them. No, these are tales woven with wisdom and sorrow, with love and betrayal, with magic and mortality. They speak to the deepest parts of what it means to be human, to struggle against fate, to seek knowledge, and to forge bonds of loyalty that transcend even death itself. So, settle yourself comfortably now. Perhaps you're wrapped in a soft blanket, the gentle glow of lamplight casting warm shadows across your room. Or maybe you're listening as the rain patters softly against your window, each drop a tiny blessing upon the earth. Wherever you are, allow yourself to drift, to let the cares of this modern world slip away like morning mist beneath the rising sun. For we are about to step back into an Ireland of long ago, a land where druids wielded powers beyond mortal comprehension, where the boundaries between our world and the other world grew thin as gossamer, and where heroes walked paths that would become legend. The Fenian Cycle, as these stories are known to scholars, forms one of the four great cycles of Irish mythology. Unlike the tales of the Ulster Cycle, which speak of warriors like Cumhaill in a more ancient, heroic age, the Fenian stories have a different flavor entirely. They are tinged with romance and tragedy, with the beauty of the natural world, and with a certain poetic melancholy that speaks to the Irish soul. These tales were not merely entertainment for our ancestors. They were a repository of cultural values, a means of understanding the landscape itself, and a way of grappling with the great questions of existence. The stories of Fionn and his Fianna were preserved in various medieval manuscripts, including the monumental Aillén na Senarach, or Tales of the Elders of Ireland, composed around the 12th century. This remarkable work, spanning some 8,000 lines, frames the Fenian tales as conversations between the last surviving members of the Fianna and St. Patrick himself, who had newly arrived in Ireland to spread the Christian faith. In these dialogues, we see the old pagan world meeting the new Christian era, and in many ways, the stories serve as a bridge between these two worlds, preserving the ancient wisdom while acknowledging the changing times. But I'm getting ahead of myself, aren't I? Let us begin at the beginning, as all good stories should. Let us travel back to a time before Fionn was the mighty leader of the Fianna, back to when he was merely a child born into danger, his very existence a threat to those who had murdered his father. For you see, the story of Fionn McCool begins not with triumph, but with tragedy. In those ancient days, Ireland was a land divided into provinces, each with its own kings and chieftains, all owing allegiance to the High King who sat upon his throne at Tara. The Fianna served as the defenders of the High King and the protectors of Ireland's shores. They were organized into different clans, the most prominent being Clan Basin and Clan Morna, and their relationship was marked by rivalry that would echo through the generations. McCool, whose name means champion, was the leader of Clan Basin and a captain of the Fianna. He was a warrior of great renown, respected and feared in equal measure. But McCool's heart was not made entirely of iron and battle fury. It knew how to love, and love it did, when his eyes fell upon Fionn, whose name means beloved or of gentle bearing. She was the daughter of Sadhbh mac Nuadat, a powerful druid who dwelt upon the hill of Almu, a place of great mystical significance. Now, Sadhbh was a man of foresight, as befitted one versed in the ancient arts. He could peer into the mists of time and see what others could not, and what he saw troubled him greatly. His visions told him that should his daughter marry, he would lose his ancestral seat at Almu. So Sadhbh refused every suitor who came calling for Fionn's hand, regardless of their wealth or status. But McCool was not a man easily deterred. His love for Fionn burned with an intensity that would not be quenched by a father's refusal. Unable to secure Sadhbh's blessing, McCool took a drastic action. He abducted Fionn, spiriting her away so they could be together. In the reckoning of those times, this was a grave offense, not merely against Sadhbh but against the social order itself. Sadhbh, his rage burning hotter than any forge fire, appealed to Conn of the 100 Battles, the High King of Ireland, demanding justice for this transgression. Conn, bound by his duty and the laws of the land, could not ignore such a plea from so prominent a druid. He forbade the union and gathered his forces. But more importantly, he found willing allies in Clan Morna, the rivals of McCool's own Clan Basin. Gol Mac Morna, a formidable warrior in his own right, saw his opportunity to seize leadership of the Fianna from McCool. The two forces met at the Battle of Gabhra, fought near what is today known as Castle Knock. The combat was fierce and bloody, as such things always are. Despite his prowess, McCool found himself outmanned and outmaneuvered. In the chaos of battle, it was Gol Mac Morna himself who struck the fatal blow, ending McCool's life and claiming leadership of the Fianna. Some versions of the tale say that Gol lost an eye in this battle, henceforth earning him the name Gol, meaning one-eyed. With McCool dead, Fionn found herself in a desperate situation. She was pregnant with McCool's child, and her father, still seething with rage, rejected her utterly. She had nowhere to turn, no one to protect her. The child she carried was in mortal danger, for Clan Morna would surely seek to eliminate any heir of McCool who might one day seek vengeance. It was then that Fionn turned to those she could trust. She sought out Bodmall, a druidess of considerable power, and Liath Luacra, a warrior woman renowned for her skills in combat. These two remarkable women agreed to take the child when he was born and raise him in secret, far from the eyes of those who would do him harm. When the child entered the world, Fionn named him Dem, a name that would serve him in his years of hiding. He was born with features that marked him as his father's son, and there was about him an air of destiny, as if the very land itself recognized that this child would grow to reshape the world around him. Fionn, her heart breaking but her resolve firm, gave her son to Bodmall and Liath Luacra, knowing it was the only way to keep him safe. And so, young Dem was taken deep into the wild places of Ireland, to the forests of the Slieve Bloom Mountains in what is now County Lowis. There, far from the courts of kings and the machinations of rival clans, he was raised by these two extraordinary women. Bodmall taught him the wisdom of the Druids, the lore of plants and animals, the secrets whispered by the wind through the leaves. She showed him how to read the stars and understand the patterns of nature, how to listen to the land and hear its ancient voice. Liath Luacra, fierce as any warrior born, trained him in the arts of combat. She taught him to wield sword and spear, to move through the forest as silently as a shadow, to hunt and track with preternatural skill. Under her tutelage, Dem grew strong and swift, his body becoming a weapon as finely honed as any blade. The boy thrived in this wild upbringing. He learned to swim in the cold mountain streams, to run faster than any of his age, to leap higher and strike harder. But more than physical prowess, he developed a keen mind and a generous heart. The two women instilled in him values that would shape his entire life: courage in the face of danger, wisdom in the making of decisions, and loyalty to those who earned it. Yet even in this remote sanctuary, danger found its way to young Dem. Word began to spread of a fair-haired boy of exceptional abilities living in the mountains. Such rumors eventually reached the ears of Clan Morna, who grew suspicious that this might be McCool's son. Bodmall and Liath Luacra, ever vigilant, realized their charge was no longer safe in their care. With heavy hearts, they sent Dem away, to continue his education elsewhere, to remain hidden while learning all he would need to one day claim his birthright. The boy who would become Fionn McCool began his wanderings, moving from teacher to teacher, each one adding another layer to his growing wisdom and skill. It was during these journeys that he would receive the name by which all Ireland would come to know him. Our young hero's path eventually led him to the banks of the River Boyne, that sacred waterway that flows through the very heart of Irish history and mythology. The Boyne was not merely a river to the ancient Irish. It was a place of profound spiritual significance, its waters believed to flow from the otherworld itself. Along its banks grew the sacred hazel trees, whose nuts contained all the wisdom of the cosmos. It was here that Dem came to study under the poet Finnegans, also known as Fianna. Now, Finnegans was no ordinary poet. In ancient Ireland, poets held positions of immense power and respect. They were the keepers of history, the preservers of genealogies, the speakers of truth to power. A poet's words could bless or curse, could elevate a king or bring him low. To become a master poet required years of rigorous study, of memorizing countless verses and tales, of learning the intricate meters and forms that gave poetry its power. Finnegans was considered among the wisest men in all of Ireland, but even he knew that his wisdom was incomplete. For years, he had harbored a singular obsession: to catch the legendary Salmon of Knowledge, known in Irish as the Bran and Sceolang. This was no ordinary fish, but a creature of profound mystical power. The legend told of how this salmon had eaten 9 hazelnuts that fell into the well of wisdom from the 9 sacred hazel trees that surrounded it. These nuts contained all the knowledge and wisdom of the world, and by consuming them, the salmon had absorbed this vast understanding into its very being. It was prophesied that whoever first tasted the flesh of this salmon would inherit all this cosmic wisdom, becoming the wisest of all beings. For 7 long years, Finnegans had camped by the banks of the Boyne, waiting patiently for his chance to catch this elusive fish. 7 years of watching the water's surface, of casting his line into the depths, of hoping that this day, this hour, this moment would be the one when his destiny would be fulfilled. And during those 7 years, he had never caught so much as a glimpse of the legendary creature. When young Dem arrived to study under him, Finnegans saw a bright and eager student, but he did not suspect that this boy's destiny was intertwined with his own. He took the youth on as an apprentice, teaching him the arts of poetry and the deeper mysteries of bardic knowledge. Dem proved himself an exceptional student, his mind quick and his memory sharp, absorbing everything his teacher shared with him. Then one spring morning, as the sun painted the river's surface with gold and silver, Finnegans felt a mighty tug on his fishing line. His heart leaped within his chest. After all these years, all this patient waiting, could it finally be? With trembling hands and racing pulse, he fought to bring his catch to shore. And there it was, magnificent beyond imagining, scales shimmering with an otherworldly light, its body seeming to glow from within. The Salmon of Knowledge had at last been caught. Finnegans' hands shook with excitement and anticipation. After 7 years of waiting, he was mere moments away from obtaining all the wisdom of the world. But he was also exhausted from the struggle to land such a powerful creature. He turned to his young apprentice and gave him a crucial task. "Dem," he said, his voice filled with gravitas, "I entrust you with cooking this fish. You must turn it carefully over the fire, ensuring it cooks evenly. But mark my words well, you must not eat even the smallest morsel of it. Not a single taste must pass your lips. Do you understand?" The boy nodded solemnly, understanding the importance of this charge. Finnegans, weary from his long struggle, went to rest while Dem set about building a fire and preparing to cook the salmon. The young man was diligent in his task, watching the fish carefully as it roasted over the flames. The aroma that rose from it was intoxicating, unlike anything he had ever smelled before, carrying within it hints of forests ancient beyond reckoning, of oceans deeper than thought, of stars wheeling in their eternal dance. As the salmon cooked, a blister formed on its skin. Wanting to ensure the fish cooked evenly as he had been instructed, Dem reached out to press down the blister with his thumb. The moment his skin touched the fish, a searing heat shot through his flesh. Instinctively, without thinking, he thrust his burned thumb into his mouth to ease the pain. In that instant, everything changed. A surge of knowledge flooded through him, vast and overwhelming, like a dam breaking and releasing an ocean of understanding. He saw the patterns underlying all things, the connections between stars and stones, between words and worlds. The secrets of the universe unfolded before his inner eye like a flower opening to the sun. When Finnegans returned, he looked upon his student and immediately knew that something profound had occurred. There was a light in the boy's eyes that had not been there before, a depth of wisdom that spoke of ages beyond his years. The poet's heart sank even as it soared with wonder. "Have you eaten any of the salmon?" Finnegans asked, his voice steady despite the turmoil within. Dem explained truthfully what had happened, how he had burned his thumb and put it in his mouth without thinking. He had not meant to disobey his master's instructions, had not intentionally sought to claim the wisdom for himself. Finnegans looked upon his student for a long moment, grief and acceptance warring within him. For 7 years he had waited, and now the prize he sought had slipped through his fingers. Yet looking at the boy before him, seeing the destiny written clearly in those newly-wise eyes, the old poet understood that this was meant to be. The prophecy had never been about him. "Tell me your name," Finnegans said. "I am called Dem," the boy replied. The poet shook his head slowly. "No, your name is Fionn, the fair one, the bright one. And you are destined for greatness beyond anything I could have imagined. Eat the rest of the salmon, for it is yours by right. The knowledge belongs to you." And so Fionn consumed the salmon of knowledge, and all the wisdom it contained became his. From that day forward, whenever he needed to access this vast understanding, he had only to bite or suck upon his thumb where it had been burned, and knowledge would flow into his mind like water from a spring. This ability would serve him well in the many trials and adventures that lay ahead. With Finnegans' blessing and the wisdom of the ages now his to command, Fionn set forth from the banks of the Boyne. He was no longer a hunted boy hiding in the wilderness. He was becoming the man who would reshape the destiny of Ireland, who would lead the Fianna to their greatest glory, and whose name would echo through the centuries. Armed with the wisdom granted by the Salmon of Knowledge, Fionn knew that the time had come to claim his birthright. His path led him to Tara, the seat of the High Kings of Ireland, that sacred hill where the fate of nations was decided and where power radiated outward like ripples from a stone cast into still water. It was not mere ambition that drove Fionn to Tara. He carried with him a plan, one that had crystallized in his mind through his newly acquired wisdom. He understood that to gain the leadership of the Fianna, he could not simply challenge those who had killed his father. No, he would need to prove himself worthy, to accomplish a deed so extraordinary that none could question his right to lead. Fionn arrived at Tara during the time of Samhain, that liminal season when the boundaries between worlds grew thin as morning mist. It was a time of great gatherings, when the nobles of Ireland came together to celebrate, to conduct business, and to honor the turning of the year. But Samhain at Tara was also a time of terror, for it was then that a being of nightmare would emerge from the other world. His name was Aillén mac Midgna, though he was more commonly known by his fearsome epithet, the Burner. Aillén was a member of the Tuatha de Danann, those godlike beings who had once ruled Ireland before retreating into the Hollow Hills. But unlike many of his kin who remained in their otherworldly realms, Aillén harbored malice toward the mortal world. For 23 years, Aillén had terrorized Tara. Each Samhain, when the veil between worlds was at its thinnest, he would emerge from his dwelling at Sid Fianna. He carried with him a timpan, a stringed instrument, and when he played upon it, the music that issued forth was unlike any heard in the mortal realm. It was simultaneously beautiful beyond description and terrible beyond endurance, a melody that seeped into the minds of all who heard it, dragging them down into an enchanted slumber from which they could not wake. Once all the guards and warriors of Tara had succumbed to this magical sleep, Aillén would open his mouth and breathe forth flames of supernatural intensity. These were not ordinary flames, but fire born of the otherworld itself, burning hotter than any forge, brighter than the midsummer sun. Year after year, he reduced the great hall of Tara to ashen cinders, and year after year, the people would rebuild, only to see their work destroyed the following Samhain. The High King Conn of the 100 Battles and his court had tried everything to stop this yearly devastation. They posted extra guards, employed druids to work protective magic, offered rewards to any who could defeat the burner. But always, the result was the same. The enchanted music would put all to sleep, and the flames would consume their work. When Fionn arrived at Tara and presented himself to the High King, Conn looked upon this young warrior with curiosity. Here was a stranger, fair of hair and keen of eye, who carried himself with a confidence beyond his years. Fionn announced himself as the son of McCool, rightful heir to Clan Basin, and a murmur ran through the assembled court. Gall Mac Morna, who now led the Fianna, watched this newcomer with cautious eyes, knowing that the appearance of McCool's son could upset the delicate balance of power. But Fionn had not come to challenge Gall directly. Instead, he made the High King an offer. He would defeat Aillén the Burner, ending the terror that had plagued Tara for over 2 decades. In return, if he succeeded, he asked only that he be granted leadership of the Fianna, the position that had been his father's by right. Conn agreed readily to these terms. After all, countless warriors had tried and failed to defeat the burner. What harm was there in letting this young man try? If he succeeded, the curse would be lifted. If he failed, well, one more warrior would have given his life in service to Tara. But Fionn, wise beyond his years thanks to the salmon's gift, had already devised a plan. He sought out an old warrior named Fiasha Mac Conga, who had once served under his father McCool. Fiasha recognized the son of his former captain and agreed to help him. The old warrior possessed a magical spear, Burger, which had belonged to McCool himself. This spear had a unique property. Its point was so venomous, so charged with magical potency, that merely inhaling the fumes from its blade would ward off any enchantment, including the spell song of Aillén. Fiasha, moved by loyalty to his fallen captain's memory, and seeing in Fionn the same noble bearing that McCool had possessed, gave the young warrior the spear. Armed with this weapon and his own considerable wisdom, Fionn prepared for his confrontation with the burner. As darkness fell on Samhain Eve, Fionn took up his position at Tara. He could feel the change in the air as the barrier between worlds thinned, could sense the approach of something ancient and terrible. The other warriors stood ready at their posts, determined to stay awake this time, convinced that their vigilance would be sufficient. Fionn knew better. When Aillén emerged from the mists, he was terrible to behold. His form was that of a man, but his skin seemed to glow with an inner fire, and when he opened his mouth to play his timpan, the very air seemed to shimmer with otherworldly power. The music began, and it was every bit as enchanting as the tales had described. Within moments, the warriors of Tara began to sway, their eyelids growing heavy, their weapons slipping from loosening fingers. But Fionn did not succumb. As the first notes reached his ears, he pressed the point of the magical spear to his forehead, inhaling deeply the potent fumes from its venomous tip. The poison shocked his system, filling his veins with fire that burned away the drowsiness attempting to claim him. His mind remained sharp and clear even as all around him fell into enchanted slumber. Aillén, seeing the lone figure still standing amidst the sleeping multitude, was momentarily surprised. In all his years of terrorizing Tara, never had anyone resisted his music. But his surprise quickly turned to fury. He ceased his playing and drew in a great breath, preparing to unleash his devastating flames upon this impudent mortal. But Fionn was ready. As Aillén's mouth opened to breathe forth fire, Fionn raised his father's cloak, which had been woven with protective enchantments by the druids of the Fianna. The flames parted around him like water around a stone, their deadly heat deflected by the ancient magic. Fionn then charged forward, spear in hand. Aillén, seeing his flames had no effect, turned to flee back toward the safety of his Cid. If he could reach the otherworldly mound, he would be beyond the reach of this mortal warrior. But Fionn was swift as the wind itself. Drawing back his arm, he cast the spear with all his might and all his skill. The weapon flew true, striking Aillén through the heart. The burner fell, his reign of terror finally ended. Fionn stood over the fallen creature, and in that moment, he claimed his destiny. He severed Aillén's head as proof of his victory and carried it back to the royal hall. When dawn broke and the enchanted sleep lifted, the warriors of Tara awoke to find themselves unharmed, the hall still standing, and a young fair-haired warrior holding the severed head of their tormentor. The cheer that rose from their throats echoed across the land. Fionn McCool had done what no warrior before him could accomplish. True to his word, Conn of the 100 Battles granted Fionn the leadership of the Fianna. Gall mac Morna, the man who had slain Fionn's father, faced a crucial choice. He could challenge this decision and risk civil war among the Fianna, or he could accept Fionn's right to lead. In a gesture that spoke to his own sense of honor, Gall chose to step down. He knelt before Fionn and swore loyalty to him, recognizing that this young warrior had proven himself worthy of command. It was a moment of remarkable restraint on both sides. Fionn, despite knowing that this man had killed his father, chose not to seek immediate vengeance. And Gall, despite having held the leadership for years, chose to respect the will of the High King and the clear demonstration of Fionn's worthiness. This uneasy peace between them would mark the beginning of a new era for the Fianna, one that would see them rise to their greatest glory under Fionn's wise leadership. With Fionn now established as the leader of the Fianna, we must turn our attention to understanding exactly what this warrior band was and what made them so extraordinary in the annals of Irish history and legend. The Fianna were not merely soldiers or mercenaries. They were an elite order of warrior poets, a brotherhood bound by oaths of loyalty and honor that transcended clan and province. Their primary duty was to serve and protect the High King of Ireland, defending the shores from invasion and keeping the peace throughout the land. But they were much more than simple guards. They were hunters and trackers of unparalleled skill, poets and scholars versed in the ancient lore, and protectors of the weak and the wronged. During the warmer months, from Beltane to Samhain, the Fianna lived wild, dwelling in the forests and open lands of Ireland. They hunted for their sustenance, honing their skills as trackers and warriors. Their lives were spent in the deep woods and mountain passes, learning every hidden path, every secret glen. They became as much a part of the land as the ancient trees and standing stones. This was not mere survival, but a spiritual practice, a way of remaining connected to the natural world and the rhythms of the earth. When winter descended upon the land and the cold winds blew from the north, the Fianna would be quartered among the nobility of Ireland. Each household considered it an honor to host these warriors, providing them with food and shelter in exchange for their protection and the entertainment of their stories and songs. In this way, the Fianna served as cultural ambassadors as well as defenders, spreading tales and poetry throughout the land. The organization of the Fianna was carefully structured. The main body consisted of 3 battalions, called Cathes, each comprising 3,000 warriors. This meant that in times of peace, some 9,000 trained fighters stood ready to defend Ireland. When war threatened, this number could swell to 7 battalions, bringing the total to 21,000 warriors. The Fianna were divided into provincial groups, each with their own chieftain who reported to the overall leader, the Rifhaine, which translates as King of the Fianna. This was the position that Fionn now held. But what truly set the Fianna apart from other warrior bands was not their numbers or their organization. It was the rigorous standards they maintained and the comprehensive training required of any who wished to join their ranks. The path to becoming a member of the Fianna was not one to be taken lightly, for it demanded excellence in mind, body, and character. The first requirement was entirely intellectual. Before any test of physical prowess, a candidate had to demonstrate mastery of the 12 books of poetry. These were not simple verses, but comprehensive works that contained the histories, genealogies, and legends of Ireland. To know these was to understand the soul of the land itself, to carry within one's memory the stories that defined the Irish people. This requirement ensured that every Fianna warrior was also a scholar, capable of composing verse and reciting the ancient tales. Once this intellectual standard was met, the physical trials began, and they were nothing short of extraordinary. In the first test, the candidate would be placed in a trench dug into the earth, standing with the soil reaching up to his knees. Armed only with a shield and a staff of hazelwood, he was surrounded by 9 warriors who simultaneously cast their spears at him. If even a single spear found its mark, if so much as a scratch was inflicted, the candidate failed and could not join. This test demanded not only incredible reflexes and skill with the shield, but also the mental fortitude to remain calm while death flew at him from 9 directions. The second test was equally demanding. The candidate would have his hair elaborately braided, then be set loose to run through the forest. He was given a head start of only the breadth of a single tree trunk, and then warriors would pursue him. He had to run through the densest parts of the forest, leaping over obstacles, dodging through brambles and low branches, all while moving at full speed. If he was caught, he failed. If a single braid came undone from his hair during the chase, he failed. If a branch cracked beneath his foot loudly enough to be heard, he failed. And when the chase ended, his weapons had to be still firmly in his grasp, not dropped in the effort of running. A candidate also had to prove he could leap over a branch held at the level of his forehead and pass under one held at the level of his knee, all while maintaining full speed. He had to be able to draw a thorn from his foot while running without slowing his pace. These tests ensured that every Fianna warrior possessed not only strength and speed, but grace and agility as well. Yet even after passing these demanding physical trials, a candidate's journey was not complete. He had to make solemn oaths, swearing to uphold the code of honor that governed the Fianna. These were known as the 4 Gisa of Fenian chivalry, sacred vows that bound a warrior for life. First, he must marry his wife without consideration of dowry, choosing her for her virtues and character alone, not for wealth or land. This ensured that the Fianna valued honor above material gain. Second, he must be gentle with all women, treating them with respect and courtesy regardless of their station. Third, he must never hoard anything that another person stood in need of. The Fianna were renowned for their generosity, sharing freely whatever they possessed. And fourth, he must stand and fight against all odds, even when outnumbered as severely as 9-1. Retreat was acceptable only when the situation was truly hopeless, and even then, a Fianna warrior preferred death with honor to survival with shame. There was another crucial aspect to joining the Fianna that speaks to the profound commitment required. When a man passed all the tests and took his oaths, he formally severed his legal ties to his birth family. His primary allegiance was no longer to his clan or his blood relatives, but to the Fianna itself. The other warriors became his brothers, and their bonds of loyalty were to be unbreakable. This was both a legal and spiritual transformation, marking the candidate as forever changed, no longer the man he had been but reborn as a true Fianna warrior. These strict requirements served multiple purposes. They ensured that only the finest warriors, the most honorable men, could enter the ranks. But they also created a sense of shared identity and purpose. Every Fianna warrior knew that his brothers had endured the same trials, had proven themselves in the same ways, had sworn the same sacred oaths. This shared experience forged bonds stronger than any ordinary military unit could claim. Under Fionn's leadership, the Fianna flourished. He led them not through tyranny or fear, but through the example of his own wisdom and courage. He demanded much of his men, but no more than he demanded of himself. The famous saying associated with the Fianna reflects the values that Fionn instilled in them: truth in our hearts, strength in our arms, honesty in our speech. Among the most famous warriors who served under Fionn were his own family members and closest companions. There was his son Oisín, who would grow to become not only a mighty warrior but perhaps the greatest poet of his age. There was Oscar, Oisín's son and Fionn's beloved grandson, who would become the fiercest fighter among all the Fianna. There was Diarmuid and Gráinne, possessed of a beauty spot that made all women fall helplessly in love with him. There was Cumhaill and Gráinne, renowned for his incredible speed and his vast memory of tales and places. And there was Conan MacMorna, brother to Goll, whose sharp tongue and sometimes cowardly nature provided moments of comic relief amid the heroic deeds. And of course, we cannot speak of Fionn without mentioning his beloved hounds, Bran and Sceolang. These were no ordinary dogs, but creatures with a supernatural origin. Their mother was Twig, Fionn's aunt, who had been transformed into a hound by a jealous woman of the otherworld while pregnant. Though Twig was eventually restored to her human form, her children remained as hounds. Because they had been born of a human mother, they possessed intelligence and understanding beyond normal animals. They could understand human speech and seemed to possess wisdom of their own. Fionn valued them not merely as hunting companions, but as trusted confidants. The hill of Aillén in County Kildare became Fionn's principal residence and the headquarters of the Fianna. From this high ground, Fionn could survey the surrounding lands, and it was here that the greatest feasts and gatherings were held. The hall at Aillén became legendary for its generosity and hospitality, where any who came in peace were welcomed and fed. Life among the Fianna was not all serious duty and solemn oaths, however. These were men who lived fully, who appreciated beauty and pleasure alongside honor and courage. They spent their days in the hunt, pursuing deer through the green glens of Ireland, the baying of their hounds echoing off the ancient hills. They competed among themselves in feats of strength and skill, always pushing each other to greater excellence. And in the evenings, they would gather around their fires to share tales and compose poetry, celebrating their deeds and the beauty of the land they protected. Fionn's leadership was marked by his remarkable sense of justice and fairness. It was said of him that his judgment was so true that if he had to decide between a stranger and his own son, he would be equally fair to both. His generosity was legendary as well. If all the leaves falling from the trees were gold and the foam on the waves was silver, Fionn would give it all away to any who asked. These qualities, combined with his supernatural wisdom, made him the perfect leader for such an exceptional band of warriors. The Fianna under Fionn became more than just a military force. They became the embodiment of Irish ideals, brave but thoughtful, strong but poetic, fierce in battle but gentle in peace. Their stories would be told and retold through the centuries, their deeds becoming the standard by which all others were measured. Now, my dear dreamers, let us turn to matters of the heart, for even the greatest warriors are not immune to love's sweet and sorrowful power. The story of Fionn and Sadhbh is one of the most beautiful and tragic tales in all of Irish mythology, a story of love found and lost that echoes with profound melancholy. We have already spoken of Fionn's hounds, Bran and Sceolang, those remarkable creatures born of a woman transformed into a hound. It is because of their supernatural origin that they possessed the ability to recognize when another creature was not what it appeared to be. This ability would prove crucial in the tale that follows. One day, Fionn and the Fianna were out hunting, as was their custom. Their hounds had caught the scent of a deer and were in full pursuit. Fionn, mounted on his swift horse, led the chase, following the sound of baying hounds through the green forest. Eventually, he came upon a sight that made him pull back sharply on his reins. There stood a beautiful doe, her coat smooth and golden in the dappled light. But rather than attacking this prey, Bran and Sceolang were behaving in the most extraordinary manner. They had positioned themselves protectively around the deer, licking her face and paws with gentleness, as if greeting not quarry but kin. Fionn, wise as he was, understood immediately that this was no ordinary deer. His hounds, with their supernatural perception, recognized something about this creature that revealed her true nature. Fionn dismounted and approached slowly, speaking in soft, soothing tones. "Fear not, gentle one," he said. "Whatever you are safe with me. My hounds know you for what you truly are, and so I will bring you to my home, where no harm shall come to you." The doe, her eyes large and liquid with something that looked remarkably like understanding, allowed Fionn to lead her back to his fortress at Aillén. She followed him willingly, Bran and Sceolang keeping close beside her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. As they passed through the gates of Fionn's home, an astonishing transformation occurred. The moment the doe set foot within the bounds of Fionn's fortress, her form began to shimmer and change. Where the deer had stood, now rose a woman of breathtaking beauty. Her hair was dark and glossy as a raven's wing, her eyes deep as forest pools, her bearing regal and graceful. Her name was Sadhbh, which means sweet or lovely, and it was a name that suited her perfectly. She was the daughter of Bodb Durg, who was king of the Cid of Munster and a son of the great god the Dagda himself. In other words, Sadhbh was of divine lineage, a woman of the Tuatha de Danann. When she had recovered from her transformation, Sadhbh told Fionn her story, and it was a tale of sorrow and persecution. A dark druid named Fionn, whose name means dark man or man of darkness, had desired her. He had pressed his attentions upon her, demanding that she become his consort. But Sadhbh, repulsed by his malicious nature, had refused him. Fionn was not a man to accept rejection. His fury at being spurned twisted into something cold and terrible. Using his dark powers, he cast a spell upon Sadhbh, transforming her into a doe. He meant for her to be hunted by wolves, to live her life in terror until some predator finally caught and devoured her. For 3 long years, Sadhbh had wandered in her deer form, always running, always hiding, never knowing rest or peace. But one of Fionn's own servants took pity on her. This man told Sadhbh in secret that the druid's power over her had one limitation. If she could find her way to the fort of the Fianna of Ireland and set foot within its boundaries, the spell would be broken and Fionn would no longer have power over her. And so Sadhbh had made her way, guided perhaps by fate itself, to Fionn's hunting ground, where his magical hounds had recognized her true nature. Fionn, hearing her story, felt his heart swell with emotions he had never experienced before. Here was a woman of grace and beauty, of strength and sorrow, who had suffered much but retained her spirit. Before he knew what was happening, he was completely and utterly in love. Sadhbh, for her part, looked upon this fair-haired warrior who had shown her such kindness, who had listened to her story with compassion and promised her protection, and she felt her own heart respond. Love blossomed between them like flowers opening to the sun, swift and beautiful and inevitable. They were married soon after, and Fionn entered into a period of happiness greater than any he had known. So deep was his love for Sadhbh that he gave up the things he had loved most: the hunt, the company of his warriors in the field, the wild freedom of life in the forests. He wanted nothing but to be near her, to see her smile, to hear her voice. For Fionn McCool, the greatest warrior in Ireland, his world had narrowed to this one woman, and he found that world more than sufficient. Sadhbh, too, found joy in their union. After 3 years of terror and loneliness, she had found not just safety but love. She blossomed under Fionn's devotion, her beauty seeming to grow even greater, her laughter ringing through the halls of Aillén like music. And soon, their happiness was made complete when Sadhbh told Fionn that she was with child. Fionn's joy knew no bounds. He would have a son or daughter, a child born of this perfect love. He hovered protectively over Sadhbh, ensuring her every comfort, watching over her with a devotion that was almost fierce in its intensity. But darkness does not forget its quarry, and Fionn had never stopped seeking Sadhbh. When word eventually reached him of the beautiful woman living at Aillén, the woman who had once been a deer, his fury rekindled into white-hot rage. She had escaped him, had found happiness while he brooded in his darkness. Such a thing could not be tolerated. The druid bided his time, waiting for the perfect opportunity. That opportunity came when word reached Ireland of Viking raiders attacking the coast. Fionn, bound by his duty as leader of the Fianna, had no choice but to ride out with his warriors to defend the land. It tore at his heart to leave Sadhbh, especially while she was heavy with child, but his responsibilities could not be ignored. "Stay within the walls," he begged her. "Do not venture outside the fortress for any reason. Here you are safe from the dark man's power. Wait for me, my love, and I will return to you as swiftly as I can." Sadhbh promised, watching with anxious eyes as Fionn rode away. For several days, all was well. She remained within the safety of the fort, attended by servants who cared for her every need. But she missed Fionn terribly, and each day she would walk along the walls, her eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of his return. Then, on the fourth day, her heart leaped with joy. There, approaching the fortress, was a figure she knew better than any other in the world. Fionn. He had returned, and there beside him were Bran and Sceolang, his faithful hounds. Sadhbh cried out with happiness and rushed to meet him, forgetting in her joy the promise she had made. She ran out through the gates, her arms outstretched, calling Fionn's name. But the moment she crossed the threshold, the moment her feet left the protected ground of the fortress, she realized her terrible mistake. The figure before her shimmered and changed, and where Fionn had stood was Fionn, the dark druid, his face twisted with malicious triumph. He had used his powers to create an illusion, a perfect replica of Fionn and his hounds, to lure Sadhbh from her sanctuary. And she, in her love and longing, had fallen into his trap. Before she could flee back to safety, Fionn struck her with his hazel wand, and once again Sadhbh felt her form twisting and changing. Once again, she became a doe, her human awareness trapped within the animal body. Fionn cackled with cruel satisfaction as he drove her away from the fortress, back into the wild places where she would be at his mercy once more. When Fionn returned home victorious from battle, expecting to find his beloved wife waiting for him with joyful greeting, he instead found chaos and grief. His servants told him what had happened, how they had seen what they thought was Fionn approaching, how Sadhbh had run out to meet him, and how both she and the figure had vanished before anyone could stop them. The pain that struck Fionn was greater than any wound he had ever received in battle. His Sadhbh, his gentle, beautiful wife, the mother of his unborn child, had been taken from him by dark magic. He felt as though his heart had been torn from his chest. For 7 years, Fionn searched for Sadhbh. He neglected his duties as leader of the Fianna, caring for nothing but finding his lost love. He scoured every forest, every mountain, every glen in Ireland. Bran and Sceolang accompanied him always, their supernatural senses seeking any trace of the woman they too had loved. But Fionn had hidden her well, and Sadhbh could not be found. Then one day, while searching the wilds of Ben Bulben in County Sligo, Bran and Sceolang suddenly became excited, racing ahead into a thicket. Fionn followed, hope surging within him despite 7 years of disappointment. Perhaps this time, finally, they had found her. What he discovered was not his wife, but something that stopped him in his tracks. There, protected within a circle formed by his 2 hounds, was a young boy. The child was wild, his hair long and matted, his body bare to the elements. He had clearly been living in the forest for some time, surviving as an animal might. But there was something about him, something in the shape of his face, the cast of his features, that made Fionn's heart clench with recognition. The boy looked up at Fionn with eyes that were hauntingly familiar. They were Sadhbh's eyes. Fionn approached slowly, speaking gently so as not to frighten the child. Bran and Sceolang continued to guard the boy, but they showed no fear of Fionn, instead seeming to present the child to their master. Fionn understood then what had happened. This was his son, the child Sadhbh had been carrying when she was taken from him. With patient care, Fionn coaxed the boy to come with him. He wrapped the child in his cloak and brought him back to Aillén. Slowly, over days and weeks, the boy began to learn human speech. When he could finally communicate, he told Fionn what fragments he remembered of his early life. He remembered a gentle deer who had cared for him, who had protected him and loved him. He remembered a dark man who would come sometimes, speaking to the deer, demanding something of her that she would not give. He remembered the deer's sadness, the way she would nuzzle him with such tender affection. And he remembered the day when the dark man had struck the deer with his wand and she had run away, leaving the boy alone in the forest. Fionn listened to this story with tears streaming down his face. His beloved Sadhbh had remained in her deer form, unable to return to human shape, but she had given birth to their son and raised him as best she could. Even in her animal form, even under the power of the dark druid, she had loved and protected their child. Fionn named the boy Oisín, which means little deer or little fawn, in honor of his mother's form. He raised the child with all the love and care he would have given had Sadhbh been there beside him. Oisín grew to become one of the greatest warriors of the Fianna, but more than that, he became the greatest poet Ireland had ever known. Perhaps it was his unique origin, born of a human father and a woman who had known both human and animal existence, that gave him the ability to see the world with such profound insight. As for Sadhbh, she was never found. Legend holds that she still wanders the forests of Ireland in the form of a deer, the spell of the dark druid never fully broken. It is one of the great sorrows of Irish mythology, a love story that was beautiful in its beginning but tragic in its ending. Fionn never stopped loving her, never stopped hoping that one day he might see her again. But that reunion was not to be. The story of Fionn and Sadhbh reminds us that even the strongest among us are vulnerable to love, and that sometimes the greatest pain comes not from battles fought but from loves lost. It is a tale that has echoed through the centuries, touching the hearts of all who hear it, for we all know something of love and loss, of hope and heartbreak. Years passed, and Fionn, though he never forgot Sadhbh, came to accept that she was lost to him. His son Oisín had grown into a magnificent warrior poet, and his grandson Oscar had become the fiercest fighter among all the Fianna. The warrior band continued to thrive under Fionn's leadership, their deeds becoming legendary throughout Ireland. But fate had another tragic love story in store for Fionn, one that would eventually contribute to the downfall of the Fianna themselves. This is the tale of Diarmuid and Gráinne, a story of desire, betrayal, and the terrible consequences of love gone wrong. As Fionn grew older, he decided to take another wife. His first wife Maenus had died, and the memory of Sadhbh, though still painful, had softened with time. The Fianna sought throughout Ireland for a woman worthy of their leader, and they found her in Gráinne, the daughter of Cormac mac Airt, the High King of Ireland. Gráinne was renowned throughout the land for her extraordinary beauty. Her hair was said to shine like spun gold, her eyes to sparkle like stars reflected in water, her bearing to be as graceful as a swan gliding across a lake. She was not only beautiful but intelligent and spirited, a woman of strong will and passionate nature. Cormac agreed to the match readily. An alliance between the High King and the leader of the Fianna would strengthen both their positions. Gráinne, for her part, had heard tales of Fionn's great deeds and wisdom, and she agreed to the betrothal. A great feast was arranged to celebrate the engagement, with nobles from across Ireland gathering to honor the union. But when Gráinne first set eyes upon her intended husband, her heart sank within her. She had expected a warrior in his prime, vigorous and handsome. What she saw instead was a man past his youth, grey-haired and weathered by years of battle and sorrow. Fionn was still impressive in his way, his wisdom giving him a dignity that many younger men lacked. But to Gráinne's young eyes, he seemed more like a grandfather than a husband. As the feast progressed, Gráinne's gaze wandered to the other warriors assembled in the hall. Her eyes fell upon Diarmuid and Gráinne, and in that moment, her fate was sealed. Diarmuid was one of the most handsome men in all of Ireland. His features were perfectly formed, his body strong and graceful. But his most notable feature was a small mark upon his forehead, a love spot placed there by a young woman he had once helped. This ball Circe, as it was called, had a magical property. Any woman who looked upon it would fall helplessly in love with Diarmuid. He usually kept it covered with his hair, knowing the troubles it could cause. But on this night, perhaps by chance or perhaps by fate, the love spot was visible. Gráinne looked upon it, and immediately her heart was consumed with desire for Diarmuid. All thoughts of Fionn vanished from her mind. She could think of nothing but the beautiful warrior before her, could imagine no future that did not include him. Gráinne was not a woman to be passive in the face of her desires. She devised a plan, bold and dangerous in equal measure. She prepared a sleeping draught, potent enough to render unconscious all but those she wished to remain awake. She mixed this into the wine served at the feast, ensuring that only she and a select few warriors, Diarmuid among them, remained conscious. When the rest of the hall had succumbed to drugged sleep, Gráinne approached Diarmuid. She declared her love for him in no uncertain terms, telling him that she would not, marry Fionn. She begged him to flee with her, to take her away from this fate she could not bear. Diarmuid was horrified. His loyalty to Fionn was absolute. The leader of the Fianna was not just his captain but a man he respected and admired above all others. To elope with his betrothed would be the worst form of betrayal, a violation of every oath he had sworn. "I cannot do what you ask," Diarmuid told her, his voice filled with anguish. "Fionn is my leader, my friend, and I owe him my absolute loyalty. What you propose would destroy that bond." But Gráinne would not be deterred. Seeing that her pleas alone would not move him, she resorted to a more powerful weapon. She placed Diarmuid under a guise, a sacred bond that could not be broken. "I place you under guise to take me away from here," she declared. "And if you do not, may your honor be forever tarnished. May you be shamed before all the men of Ireland." A guise was the most binding of obligations in ancient Irish society. To violate one was to invite disaster, to lose one's honor entirely. Diarmuid found himself trapped between two impossible choices: betray his beloved leader and friend, or break a sacred guise and lose all honor. With great reluctance and a heavy heart, Diarmuid agreed to flee with Gráinne. Before they left, he sought counsel from his fellow warriors, hoping someone might find a way out of this impossible situation. But all agreed that the guise could not be ignored. Even Oisín, Fionn's own son, advised Diarmuid to go, saying that honor demanded he fulfill the obligation, no matter how painful. And so, in the darkness of night, Diarmuid and Gráinne fled from Tara. They crossed the river Shannon, leaving behind a trail that Diarmuid knew Fionn would follow. For Diarmuid understood that when Fionn awoke from his drugged sleep and found his betrothed gone with one of his most trusted warriors, his fury would be terrible to behold. Diarmuid was right. When morning came and the effects of the sleeping draught wore off, Fionn awakened to find Gráinne's seat empty. When he learned what had happened, a rage unlike anything he had ever felt consumed him. This was betrayal of the deepest kind. Not just the loss of a wife but the treachery of a man he had trusted implicitly. What followed was a pursuit that lasted for years, a chase that took Diarmuid and Gráinne across the length and breadth of Ireland. Fionn mobilized the entire Fianna to track the lovers, his rage never cooling, his determination never wavering. The pair lived as fugitives, always running, always hiding, never able to settle in one place for long. Throughout this pursuit, Diarmuid behaved with an ability that spoke to his character. For a long time, he refused to consummate his relationship with Gráinne, leaving behind tokens at their resting places to show Fionn that he had not fully betrayed him. A piece of unbroken bread left behind was meant to signal that Diarmuid had remained faithful to his leader in at least this one way. But Gráinne eventually grew frustrated with this arrangement. One day, as they were crossing a stream, water splashed up between her legs. "Even this water is bolder than you," she mocked Diarmuid. This challenge to his manhood finally broke his resolve, and he took her as his lover fully and completely. The pursuit continued, with Diarmuid employing all his skills to evade capture. He was aided at times by Angus Og, the god of love who was his foster father. Angus possessed a cloak of invisibility, which he used to hide Gráinne while Diarmuid leaped over pursuing warriors. The lovers hid in caves, in the branches of trees, in every conceivable place across Ireland. So many were their resting places that dolmens throughout the land came to be known as Líbe Diarmada agus Gráinne, the bed of Diarmuid and Gráinne. Eventually, after years of this exhausting pursuit, a peace was brokered. Angus Og pleaded with Fionn on 7 separate occasions, and finally, on the 8th attempt, along with intervention from Cormac the High King who was weary of the conflict, Fionn agreed to let the lovers be. He granted them lands in Keshcorrin in County Sligo, where they could settle and raise their children. Over time, Diarmuid and Gráinne had 4 sons and 1 daughter. Peace seemed to have been achieved. Diarmuid and Gráinne lived quietly on their lands, and Fionn appeared to have accepted the situation. But deep within his heart, the betrayal still festered. Fionn had forgiven with his words, but not with his soul. He waited, patient as stone, for his chance at revenge. That chance came in the form of a wild boar, a creature that would fulfill a prophecy laid upon Diarmuid long ago. It was fated that Diarmuid would die by a boar's tusk, and Fionn knew of this prophecy. One night, Diarmuid was awakened by the sound of a hound baying. The sound filled him with inexplicable dread, and though Gráinne begged him not to investigate, he felt compelled to discover its source. He set out with his weapons, and what he found was a great boar hunt being conducted by Fionn and the Fianna. Fionn greeted Diarmuid with apparent friendliness, inviting him to join the hunt. Diarmuid, despite his unease, could not refuse without seeming cowardly. The boar they hunted was a massive, fearsome beast, and during the course of the chase, it turned and charged Diarmuid. In the ensuing struggle, the boar's tusk gored Diarmuid terribly, inflicting a mortal wound. As Diarmuid lay dying, he remembered that Fionn possessed a gift. Any water that touched his hands gained healing properties. A single drink from Fionn's cupped hands could cure any wound, even one as grievous as Diarmuid's. "Fionn," Diarmuid gasped, "I beg you, bring me water from your hands. You have the power to heal me. For the sake of our old friendship, for the times I fought bravely by your side, please save me." Fionn looked upon his fallen warrior, and all the old rage came flooding back. He remembered the night of his betrothal feast, remembered waking to find Gráinne gone, remembered the years of pursuing them across Ireland, the public humiliation, the broken trust. He turned and walked to a nearby spring, cupping his hands to gather water. But as he walked back toward Diarmuid, he allowed the water to slip through his fingers, remembering Gráinne's betrayal. Diarmuid cried out in despair, "Please, Fionn, I am dying. Have mercy." Fionn turned back to the spring, filling his hands once more. But again, as he approached, the old anger surged within him, and again he let the water drain away. By now, Oscar and the other Fianna warriors were watching in horrified disbelief. Oscar, Fionn's own grandson, was filled with shame at his grandfather's behavior. "If you do not bring that water to Diarmuid," Oscar declared, his voice tight with fury, "I swear that one of us will not leave this place alive. You dishonor yourself and all the Fianna with your cruelty." Faced with this threat from his own grandson, Fionn finally relented. He filled his hands a third time and hurried back to Diarmuid. But it was too late. By the time he reached the fallen warrior, Diarmuid Gráinne was dead, his life's blood staining the earth of Aillén red. Gráinne, hearing of what had happened, rushed to the scene. Her cries of grief echoed across the hills, a sound of such profound sorrow that it seemed to make the very trees weep. She had lost the man she had loved so desperately, the man for whom she had given up everything. In the aftermath of Diarmuid's death, different versions of the tale diverge. Some say that Gráinne swore her children to vengeance against Fionn. Others say that she mourned herself to death, unable to bear life without her beloved. And in some tellings, perhaps the most troubling of all, Gráinne eventually reconciles with Fionn and becomes his wife after all, the very union she had fled from years before. Regardless of which ending one accepts, the tale of Diarmuid and Gráinne stands as one of the great tragic love stories of Irish mythology. It speaks to the destructive power of desire, the terrible consequences of betrayal, and the way that revenge can poison even the noblest of hearts. Fionn, the wise and generous leader, showed himself capable of petty cruelty when his heart was wounded. Diarmuid, the loyal warrior, found himself torn between impossible obligations. And Gráinne, the passionate woman, set in motion a chain of events that would lead to disaster for all involved. Let us now turn to one of the most beloved and bittersweet tales of the Fenian Cycle, the story of Oisín and his journey to Tír na nÓg, the land of eternal youth. This tale carries within it the themes of love, loss, and the inexorable passage of time, and it serves as a fitting swan song for the age of the Fianna. Oisín, as we have learned, was the son of Fionn and the lost Sadhbh. Raised among the Fianna after his father found him in the wilderness of Ben Bulben, he had grown to become not only a great warrior, but the finest poet Ireland had ever known. His verses captured the beauty of the Irish landscape, the glory of heroic deeds, and the depths of human emotion. When Oisín spoke, men listened, and when he sang, the world seemed to hold its breath. One morning, Fionn and the Fianna were resting after a hunt on the shores of Loch Aillén in County Kerry. The warriors lounged upon the green grass, their hounds panting beside them, when one of them spotted something extraordinary approaching across the water. It was a white horse, magnificent beyond compare, its coat gleaming like freshly fallen snow, its mane flowing like silk in the wind. But what made the sight truly remarkable was the rider upon its back. She was a woman of such transcendent beauty that the hardened warriors felt their breath catch in their throats. Her hair was golden as the summer sun, falling in long waves past her waist. Her eyes were the deep blue of the ocean at twilight, and her skin seemed to glow with an inner light. She was dressed in a flowing gown of pale blue that shimmered as she moved, and there was about her an otherworldly grace that marked her as no mortal woman. As the white horse drew near, seeming to move across the water's surface as easily as across solid ground, the Fianna rose to their feet. The woman's eyes scanned their faces until they came to rest upon Oisín. A smile of recognition curved her perfect lips. "I am Niamh Chinwa," she announced, her voice like music, Niamh of the golden hair. "My father is the king of Tír na nÓg, the land of eternal youth. I have heard tales of your valor and your poetry, Oisín, and I have come to bring you back with me to my home." She described Tír na nÓg in terms that set the imagination ablaze. It was a land where no one aged, where sickness and death were unknown. The weather was always fair, the orchards always laden with fruit, the forests dripping with honey. Joy and feasting lasted forever, and sorrow had no place there. It was paradise made manifest, a realm beyond the mortal world where eternal youth and happiness awaited. "Come with me, Oisín," Niamh pleaded. "Become my husband and live with me in this land of wonder. You will never know pain or aging. We will be together in perfect happiness for all eternity." Oisín looked upon this radiant being, and his heart stirred with a powerful longing. The promise of eternal youth, of endless joy, of living with this impossibly beautiful woman was almost more than he could resist. Yet he hesitated, his eyes turning to his father. Fionn stood watching, and in his eyes was a grief that he tried to hide. He had lost Sadhbh to the forces of magic, and now magic was claiming his son as well. But he was wise enough to know that he could not ask Oisín to refuse. This was his son's choice to make. "Father," Oisín said, his voice heavy with emotion, "I love you and the Fianna more than I can express. You have given me life, purpose, and brotherhood. But Niamh offers me something I cannot refuse. I must go with her, but I swear to you that I will return. I will come back to see you again soon." Fionn embraced his son, holding him tightly. "Go with my blessing," he said, though the words cost him dearly. "May the gods protect you, and may we see each other again." Oisín mounted the white horse behind Niamh, wrapping his arms around her waist. The horse turned and began to gallop across the water's surface, its hooves barely seeming to touch the waves. Oisín looked back at his father and the Fianna, growing smaller and smaller on the shore. He raised his hand in farewell, and they raised theirs in return. Then the mist closed around him, and the shores of Aillén disappeared from view. The journey to Tír na nÓg was itself a wonder. They passed through realms that defied description, saw sights that no mortal eye had ever witnessed. Eventually, they arrived at Niamh's homeland, and Oisín found that her descriptions had not done it justice. The beauty of Tír na nÓg was beyond anything he had imagined. Oisín and Niamh were married, and their love grew deep and strong. They had 3 children together, including a son they named Oscar after Oisín's fallen nephew. Oisín participated in the life of Tír na nÓg fully, joining in feasts and hunts, composing poetry, and enjoying the company of his divine wife. He was happy, truly and completely happy. But as time passed, or what seemed like time in that timeless land, Oisín began to feel a subtle ache in his heart. He missed his father, missed the Fianna, missed the green hills of Ireland. He longed to see them again, to share his stories of the wonders he had witnessed, to hunt once more in the forests of his homeland. When Niamh saw this melancholy growing in her husband, her own heart grew heavy. She knew what he wanted, and she knew the dangers of what he proposed. But she loved him too much to deny him. "I see the sadness in your eyes, my love," she said. "I know you wish to return to Ireland. I will not keep you from this, though it grieves me. Take my white horse, Embar, and he will carry you back across the water to your homeland. But hear me well, Oisín, and mark my words carefully." She took his hands in hers, her blue eyes intense with urgency. "You must not, under any circumstances, let your feet touch the soil of Ireland. While you remain on the horse, you will be protected. But the moment your feet touch the earth, the time that has passed in Ireland will catch up with you, and you will never be able to return to me. Promise me, my love. Promise me you will stay on the horse." Oisín promised, eager to see his father and friends again. He kissed Niamh goodbye, mounted Embar, and set off across the waves toward Ireland. The journey seemed quicker this time, his heart racing with anticipation. But when he arrived at the shores of Ireland, Oisín knew immediately that something was terribly wrong. The landscape was familiar, yet different. Where once great forests had stood, now there were cleared fields. Where the Fianna had camped, there was only empty space. There were no warriors, no hounds, no sign of the great band of heroes who had once roamed this land. Growing increasingly alarmed, Oisín rode toward his father's fortress at Aillén. His heart clenched with shock at what he found. The great hall was in ruins, its walls crumbling, its grounds overgrown with weeds and ivy. There was no life there, no sound of warriors feasting, no voices raised in song. The place was abandoned, as if it had been empty for a very long time. Oisín rode throughout the countryside, searching desperately for any sign of the Fianna. He saw people, but they seemed smaller and weaker than the Irish folk he remembered. When he asked them about Fionn, McCool and the Fianna, they looked at him strangely. "The Fianna," one old man replied. "Those are just stories, legends from long ago. They say a great warrior named Fionn once led them, but that was hundreds of years past. They've been gone for centuries." Centuries. The word struck Oisín like a blow. What had seemed like only 3 years in Tir na Nog had been 300 years in Ireland. His father was dead, long dead. The Fianna were no more. Everyone he had known and loved had turned to dust while he had lived in timeless joy with Niamh. Grief overwhelmed him. His father was gone, his friends were gone, his entire world had vanished. Oisín turned Mbar's head toward Tir na Nog, determined to return to Niamh and his children in that eternal land, since nothing remained for him here. As he rode, he passed through Gráinne Small, the Valley of the Thrushes. There he saw a group of men struggling to move an enormous boulder, straining and sweating but unable to budge the massive stone. In the old days, such a task would have been easy for any member of the Fianna. Oisín's generous heart, still marked by the values his father had instilled in him, could not ride past without offering help. He knew he should stay mounted, remembered Niamh's warning ringing in his ears. But these men were clearly in distress, and helping others was so ingrained in his character that he could not refuse. He leaned down from the saddle, reaching out to help push the boulder. It moved easily under his supernatural strength. But as he leaned, the girth of the saddle, worn by the journey and the years, suddenly snapped. Oisín fell from the horse, and his feet touched the soil of Ireland. The transformation was instantaneous and terrible. The 300 years that had passed in Ireland descended upon him like an avalanche. His golden hair turned white as snow, his strong limbs withered, his straight back bent with age. His face creased with countless wrinkles, his eyes dimmed, his teeth loosened. In the space of heartbeats, Oisín went from a man in his prime to an ancient, decrepit elder. The men who had witnessed this miraculous and horrifying transformation were stunned into silence. Mbar, seeing his rider fallen, turned and galloped away, disappearing into the mist, returning to Tir na Nog without him. Oisín would never see Niamh or his children again. The men brought the aged Oisín to a man who had recently arrived in Ireland, a Christian missionary named Patrick who would later become the patron saint of the Irish. Patrick took in the withered old man and listened as Oisín, with fading breath and breaking heart, told his tale. Oisín spoke of his father Fionn and the glory days of the Fianna. He recounted their hunts and battles, their honor and bravery, their poetry and feasts. He told of the great warriors who had been his companions, of the values they had upheld, of the Ireland that existed in his memory. And he told of Niamh and Tir na Nog, of eternal youth and the price of leaving it. Patrick, for his part, tried to convert Oisín to Christianity, speaking to him of heaven and eternal life through Christ. But Oisín, his heart still with his pagan father and his lost world, refused. "If my father and the Fianna are not in your heaven," Oisín declared, "then I do not wish to go there. Where they are, that is where I belong. They were good men, brave and true. If your God will not accept them, then I will not accept your God." It was a poignant clash between the old world and the new, between pagan valor and Christian salvation. Patrick continued to care for Oisín, recording his stories and preserving the tales of the Fianna for future generations. But Oisín's heart was broken beyond repair. He had lost everything: his father, his comrades, his wife, his children, his youth, his entire world. Soon after telling his tale, Oisín died, the last of the Fianna. With him passed the final living link to that heroic age, leaving only stories and memories. It is through those stories, through the words that Patrick recorded, that we know of Fionn and the Fianna today. The tale of Oisín and Tír na nÓg is one of the most moving stories in Irish mythology. It speaks to the irreversible nature of time, to the impossibility of going home again, to the way that the world changes while we are not looking. It reminds us that love, even perfect love, comes with a cost, and that every choice we make closes doors behind us that can never be reopened. Before Oisín departed for Tír na nÓg, however, the Fianna still had one final chapter to write, and it would be written in blood. This is the story of the Battle of Gabhra, the conflict that brought about the final destruction of the Fianna and the end of their heroic age. The seeds of this disaster were sown during the reign of Celtic Lifechair, who became High King of Ireland after his father Cormac mac Airt. Celtic had watched the growing power of the Fianna with concern. Under Fionn's leadership, the warrior band had become almost a kingdom within a kingdom, wielding influence and demanding tribute that rivaled that of the High King himself. The immediate cause of conflict arose from a matter of tribute and honor. Celtic had a beautiful daughter named Diarmuid, whose name meant light of beauty. She was betrothed to Aillén, a prince of the Daci people. By the customs of the time, the Fianna were entitled to tribute from the High King when a royal marriage took place. But the demand that Fionn made was extraordinary, some say excessive. He demanded either a large amount of gold or, according to some versions of the tale, the right to sleep with the princess before her wedding night. This latter demand, if indeed it was made, was a grave insult to the High King and his family. Celtic was outraged. He saw in this demand the arrogance that had been growing in the Fianna for years. They had become too powerful, too proud, too accustomed to having their every wish fulfilled. They were no longer servants of the High King, but masters in their own right. Celtic resolved that this would end, even if it meant war. The High King sent word to the provincial kings of Ulster, Leinster, and Connaught, calling them to his cause. He spoke to them of the oppression of the Fianna, of the tribute they demanded, of the way they had become tyrants rather than protectors. His words found fertile ground, for many had chafed under the Fianna's dominance. Crucially, Celtic also won the support of Gol mac Morna and his clan Morna, the ancient rivals of Fionn's clan Basin. Though Gol had sworn loyalty to Fionn years ago, the old enmity still simmered. Gol saw an opportunity to destroy the clan Basin once and for all and perhaps reclaim the leadership he had lost. The Fianna, for their part, found support from Munster and the Daci people. It is ironic that the prince whose wedding had sparked the conflict saw his people siding with the Fianna against the High King. The battle lines were drawn, dividing Ireland and dividing the Fianna themselves. Celtic provoked the final confrontation by killing Ferdia, Fionn's loyal servant. This act of violence left the Fianna with no choice but to respond. Honor demanded it, and so the two vast armies marched toward their fateful meeting. They met at Gabhra, a place generally identified with the modern Garristown in County Dublin, though some texts place the battle near Skryne in County Meath, between the hills of Tara and Skryne. The armies faced each other across the field, and the air was thick with tension and impending death. The battle that followed was the most terrible in the history of the Fianna. Brother fought against brother, as warriors who had once hunted together now sought to end each other's lives. The Fianna, though outnumbered by Celtic's vast coalition, fought with the desperation of men who knew their way of life was at stake. Oscar, Fionn's grandson and the mightiest warrior among all the Fianna, led the charge. His prowess on that battlefield was legendary, his sword cutting down enemies like wheat before the scythe. He sought out Celtic himself, determined to end the conflict by killing the High King. Oscar and Celtic met in single combat, two titans clashing while chaos raged around them. Their fight was brutal and unrelenting, neither man giving quarter. Finally, Oscar struck a mortal blow, his spear piercing Cerbha's body. The High King fell. But as he fell, Cerbha summoned the last of his strength. With a desperate thrust, he drove his own spear through Oscar's back and into his heart. Both men collapsed, mortally wounded, their blood mingling on the earth of Ireland. When Fionn reached his fallen grandson, a sound emerged from his throat that those who heard it would never forget. It was the cry of a heart breaking, of a world ending. In all his years, through all his losses, Fionn had never wept for a fallen warrior. Now, kneeling beside Oscar's body, tears streamed down his weathered face. "My grandson," Fionn wept, "the best of us all. Of what use is wisdom, of what use is strength, when I could not protect you? You were the finest warrior the Fianna ever produced, and now you lie dead on this cursed field." Oscar, with his dying breath, tried to comfort his grandfather. "Do not weep for me, grandfather. I died in battle, as befits a warrior of the Fianna. My only regret is that I will not be there to see you lead our brothers to future glory." But there would be no future glory. The Battle of Gabhra was the end. Though Cerbha was dead, his forces were vast and continued to fight. The Fianna, their greatest warrior fallen, began to crumble. One by one, the heroes of that legendary band were struck down. In some versions of the tale, Fionn himself was killed at Gabhra, slain by Aillén while he wept over Oscar's body. Other versions say he died shortly after, either in another battle or simply from the weight of his grief. The manner of his death varies from telling to telling, as befits a figure whose life was woven from so many stories. What is certain is that when the Battle of Gabhra ended, the Fianna were no more. Of all those legendary warriors, only two survived: Oisín, who would later depart for Tir na Nog, and Cumhaill mac Gráinne, who lost 6 of his sons in that terrible battle. These two men, aged beyond their years by grief and trauma, became the last living repositories of Fenian lore. It was Oisín and Cumhaill who, centuries later, would meet St. Patrick and recount the tales of the Fianna. Their memories, preserved by the saints' scribes, gave us the stories we know today. Through their words, the glory of Fionn and his warriors lived on, even as the warriors themselves had passed into the realm of legend. The Battle of Gabhra marks a turning point in Irish mythology, the end of the heroic age and the beginning of something new. It showed that even the mightiest warriors, the most noble of brotherhoods, could fall prey to arrogance and internal division. The Fianna, who had protected Ireland for so long, were ultimately destroyed not by an external enemy, but by the consequences of their own growing pride. Though Fionn McCool and the Fianna passed from the world, their legacy endures in ways both tangible and intangible, woven into the very fabric of Ireland itself. The Irish landscape bears countless marks of Fionn's passing. The most famous of these is the Giant's Causeway in County Antrim, that remarkable formation of hexagonal basalt columns that stretches along the coast. Legend tells that Fionn built this causeway as stepping stones to Scotland, for he wished to challenge Benandonna, a Scottish giant who had been taunting him. The causeway was his path across the sea, a testament to his supernatural strength. The tale of Fionn and Benandonna is one of the more humorous stories in the Fenian tradition. When Fionn arrived in Scotland and saw the true size of Benandonna, he realized he had made a terrible mistake. The Scottish giant was massive, far larger than Fionn himself. Retreating back across the causeway, Fionn raced home and pleaded with his wife Una to help him. Una, clever woman that she was, devised a plan. She dressed Fionn in baby clothes and placed him in an enormous cradle. When Benandonna arrived, following Fionn across the causeway, Una greeted him calmly. "Fionn is not home at present," she told the giant, "but you're welcome to wait. Have a cake while you rest." She offered him a griddle cake into which she had hidden iron griddles. When Benandonna bit into it, he broke his teeth on the iron. "These cakes are quite tough," Una said innocently, "but we Irish are hardy folk." Even the baby can eat them. She gave a cake to Fionn, who of course had a regular cake without iron, and he devoured it easily. Benandonna looked at the baby, who could eat cakes that broke his own teeth, and his blood ran cold. If the baby was this strong, what must the father be like? Terrified, he fled back across the causeway to Scotland, tearing up the stones behind him so that Fionn could not follow. This explains why the causeway is broken and does not reach all the way to Scotland today. Another landscape feature attributed to Fionn is Loch Ness, the largest lake in Ireland. According to legend, Fionn once scooped up a massive chunk of earth to throw at an enemy. The clump of earth missed its target and landed in the Irish Sea, becoming the Isle of Man. The hole left behind filled with water and became Loch Ness. Such stories tie Fionn onto the very geology of Ireland, making him not just a hero but a shaper of the land itself. Throughout Ireland, one finds dolmens and ancient structures referred to as Liber Diarmuid and Gráinne, the beds of Diarmuid and Gráinne. These stone formations mark the supposed resting places of the lovers during their long flight from Fionn. In this way, the pursuit of Diarmuid and Gráinne is written across the Irish countryside, a map of legendary love and jealousy inscribed in stone. But Fionn's legacy extends far beyond geographical features. His stories have shaped Irish cultural identity in profound ways. The values embodied by the Fianna, their emphasis on honour, courage, generosity, and wisdom, became ideals that Irish people aspired to for centuries. The saying "Cothra mene féin," meaning the fairness of the Fianna, entered the Irish language as a standard for justice and equal treatment. In literature, Fionn's influence is immeasurable. The Fenian Cycle has inspired countless works, from medieval manuscripts to modern novels. James Macpherson's Oisín poems, published in the 1760s, brought the stories of Fionn, renamed Fingal in the poems, to European attention. Though Macpherson's claims to have translated ancient Scottish Gaelic texts were controversial and largely disproved, his work had an enormous impact on the Romantic movement. Napoleon Bonaparte reportedly carried a copy of these poems with him on his campaigns. Goethe and other great writers of the era were profoundly influenced by these tales of Celtic heroism. Lady Augusta Gregory, in her 1904 work Gods and Fighting Men, provided English translations of many Fenian tales that brought them to a wider audience. William Butler Yeats, that towering figure of Irish literature, drew heavily on Fenian mythology. His poem The Wanderings of Oisín reimagined Oisín's journey to Tir na Nog, while other poems referenced the Fianna and their world. In the 20th century, the name Fianna gained new significance when organizations adopted it. The most famous was Fianna Éireann, the Irish Republican youth organization founded in 1909. The connection to the ancient warriors was intentional, invoking their spirit of resistance and their dedication to protecting Ireland. The modern organization sought to instill in young people the same values of loyalty, courage, and service that had defined Fionn's warriors. Today, the stories continue to captivate. Morgan Livelin's novel Finn McCool, published in 1994, offers a fictional retelling of Fionn's life. The tales appear in children's books, in films, in video games, in any medium where stories of heroism and magic find a home. The legend has proven remarkably adaptable, speaking to each new generation while retaining its core essence. Perhaps most significantly, the Fenian Cycle addresses universal themes that transcend time and culture. The pursuit of wisdom, as exemplified by Fionn's encounter with the Salmon of Knowledge, speaks to humanity's eternal quest for understanding. The tragedy of Diarmuid and Gráinne explores the conflict between duty and desire, between loyalty and passion. Oisín's journey to Tir na Nog contemplates the nature of time, of aging, of what we lose when we try to escape mortality. The stories also grapple with the rise and fall of power. The Fianna began as protectors and ended as oppressors, their downfall brought about not by external enemies but by their own arrogance. It's a cautionary tale that resonates through the ages, warning of what happens when those entrusted with power forget their responsibilities. In these tales, we see reflections of ourselves. Fionn, for all his wisdom, made mistakes. He let jealousy consume him with Diarmuid, let revenge poison his noble heart. He was not perfect, and that imperfection makes him human, makes him relatable. His greatest achievement was perhaps not any single heroic deed but the legacy he left, the values he instilled in his warriors, the stories that outlived them all. And so, my dear dreamers, we come to the end of our journey through the world of Fionn McCool and the Fianna. We have travelled from the moment of Fionn's birth, born into danger and loss, through his gaining of the world's wisdom from the Salmon of Knowledge. We witnessed his rise to leadership after defeating Aillén the Burner, and we explored the remarkable warrior band he led with such wisdom and honour. We shared in his joy with Sadhbh, felt the pain of her loss, and understood the melancholy that touched even his greatest happiness. We followed the tragic path of Diarmuid and Gráinne, seeing how love and jealousy can destroy even the strongest bonds. We accompanied Oisín to Tir na Nog and felt the heartbreak of his return to a world that had left him behind. And we stood at the Battle of Gabhra, where the glory of the Fianna came to its bloody end. These stories have endured for over 1,000 years because they speak to something fundamental in the human experience. They remind us that heroes are not born but made, shaped by their trials and their choices. They show us that wisdom comes from experience, often painful experience. They teach us that love can be both the greatest joy and the deepest sorrow. And they warn us that even the mightiest can fall when they forget the values that made them great. Tonight, as you drift towards sleep, perhaps you might imagine the green hills of ancient Ireland, the mist rising from the valleys, the sound of hounds baying in the distance. Perhaps you can envision Fionn and his warriors gathered around their fire, sharing tales of their adventures, their laughter mingling with the crackling of flames. Perhaps, in that space between waking and dreaming, you can touch the magic that once filled that land, when the boundaries between worlds were thin and heroes walked the earth. The Fianna are gone, passed into legend and memory, but their stories remain, as vital and meaningful today as they were when first told around ancient hearths. In these tales, we find not just entertainment but wisdom, not just heroes but reflections of our own struggles and aspirations. They are a gift from those who came before, a legacy of words and imagination that connects us to our ancestors and to the eternal truths of the human condition. Thank you for joining me tonight on this journey into Ireland's mythological heart. If these stories have touched you, if they have sparked something within your imagination, I encourage you to explore further. There are so many more tales to discover, so many more adventures waiting in the mists of Irish legend. If you enjoyed tonight's journey, please consider giving this video a like, as it helps others find these stories. Subscribe to Emerald Dreams if you haven't already, and click the notification bell so you won't miss our future explorations into Celtic mythology and Irish folklore. Your support means the world to me, and allows me to continue bringing these ancient tales to life. Until next time, may the wisdom of Fionn guide your decisions, may the courage of the Fianna strengthen your heart, and may the magic of old Ireland find its way into your dreams. Sleep well, dear dreamers, and may your rest be peaceful and deep. Good night.